Welcome to Starspeak with astrologer Maureen Richmond. Here's where you'll find the latest news on what's up with the heavens. Looking for the inner message from outer space? This is your place. So join me in welcoming your host, astrologer Maureen Richmond.
Welcome, star friends. This is Maureen Richmond, bringing you some great astrological content tonight that we all need to know about as we navigate our experience here on planet Earth. You're listening to Starspeak on the UNX digital broadcasting platform. This is your source for everything supernatural, paranormal, and ufological. And you can find me right here on UNX. Check the show schedule. Now, I know that a lot of you are out there trying to feel and experience and connect with the message from the stars. So if you're looking for that inner message from outer space, you're in the right place. Sit back now and prepare to enjoy a tour through the zodiac and to the stars beyond as we go into the show for August 7, 2023. Now, tonight's show, I've got a lot of information to share with you. So if you're listening audio on an audio platform, and taking notes, that's a good idea. But if you're driving or are doing some other activity, you can get all the information that I'm going to be telling you on my website as well, which is the Astrology of World Events. And there you'll see some dates listed. So you don't have to struggle with that tonight because there are a lot of dates and a lot of things to remember. First off, we're going to talk about the inner workings of astrology. This time around, the mechanics of retrograde Mercury. Why? Well, because on August 23, Mercury turns retrograde. So I want to get everybody ready for that ahead of time. Next, we'll look into the way the energies feel this very week, August 7 through 13, especially the Venus-Uranus Fracas. There's a lot to talk about there. Then we'll go on to look at the astrology of ufology. And in honor of retrograde Mercury, for this month, we'll be looking at 6 historical UFO encounters, which all occurred when Mercury was retrograde between the years 1947 and 2006. We'll be looking at an important figure in ufology also who has his Mercury retrograde in his personal astrology. So that'll be interesting. And finally, we'll look at the long-term trends, especially in regard to disclosure and the effect of Pluto in Aquarius. So I'll be right back in just a moment with the inner workings of astrology. August 7, 2023 is today's date as I make this recording. And hello to all of you who are out there listening or watching. We thank you so much for joining us and for being in the conversation and in the contemplation about the astrological energies. You know, you hear a lot about retrograde Mercury, don't you? It's on every popular astrological website and people talk about it and joke about it all the time. But what is it really? Well, it's an appearance, the way things look, in other words, and it results from the concentric arrangement of our solar system and the angle of view from our planet. It just so happens, with all that happening, that there are times when it looks, from our perspective here on Earth, as if the planet Mercury has ceased its normal forward motion and is moving backwards. Of course, that's not really true. It's going on in its normal orbit around the sun, just like always. But this perspective that we get when we're in a certain relationship with all of those factors is important astrologically. It indicates a different perspective coming into our minds. Now, Mercury is retrograde 3 times every year. Occasionally, there's even a 4th period if the retrograde period begins near the end of the year and laps over into the next year. But normally, it's 3 times. And each time, Mercury appears in retrograde motion for about 21 days. So as you can see, that's not a large proportion of the days in the year. In fact, it's only about 17% of the time that Mercury is retrograde. So it definitely represents a non-normal condition if you compare it to the rest of the time. It's a natural phenomenon, but it does indicate a departure from the norm. And that's exactly what it's all about, a departure from the norm, a change in the way of doing things, or a change in one's outlook or feelings or plans or objectives in life even. Yes, because with retrograde Mercury, we have a different view on the matter, whatever it happens to be. Now, the retrograde Mercury influence comes to us in 3 chunks every single time it comes. It's only formally retrograde for 21 days. That's true. Just 3 weeks. That's all. But it exerts an influence before and after that 21-day period. The 21-day period is the time of the formal retrograde period. But on either ends, we have what's called the retrograde shadow periods. The first one starts when Mercury approaches the degrees of the zodiac and gets in the degrees of the zodiac that will be affected by retrogradation. Then there's the formal retrograde period, and then the ending shadow, which occurs as Mercury moves through the degrees in the zodiac that were affected by retrogradation and becomes completely clear of that effect. So guess what? That extends the retrograde Mercury effect to about 2 months every time. And there are 3 of those periods. So that means that 6 months out of the year, there's some degree of retrograde Mercury influence. It's about half the year. But it's only that brief 3-week period each time that Mercury is formally retrograde. So for the shadow period, there's a mild or weak retrograde influence. Then during the formal retrograde period, there is a strong retrograde influence. Then in the second shadow period, there is a weak or mild retrograde influence. And those are the mechanics of the retrograde Mercury experience that we all go through 3 times every calendar year. Now, you know, if you're any years old at all, you've experienced this quite a bit already. It's something that we live through. It's not cataclysmic, but it's worth noticing because it does bring a change into our experience and lots of questions into our minds about what is true, what is reliable, what is good, what the right direction is, because all of a sudden we get different information than we had had before. We get a different experience of ourselves. And this is, of course, subtle in the beginning, starting with the first shadow period, right? The effect begins to come into our awareness and then increases greatly with the formal retrograde period and then decreases and tails off with the second shadow period. So it's kind of subtle in the beginning, right? Well, guess what? We just recently entered the first shadow period As a matter of fact, that began on August 4. So we're already there. We're already to the point where schedules are beginning to change, attitudes are beginning to change, reevaluations are starting to happen, and we're finding that things don't work as expected. Some little surprises and little kinks and little aberrations here and there have begun already, did begin already on August 4. Today is August 7, so we're fully 3 days into this process. Well, we're not yet to retrograde Mercury. That doesn't happen until August 23. So we're in the period of the mild influence from August 4 through August 22, which is now. If you're hearing this program live tonight, then we're still in that mild period of retrograde Mercury influence. I'll be right back in a moment with more on the way the energies are feeling. Yes, retrograde Mercury has already reached out to begin affecting us this week, August 7 through 13. It's one of the influences to keep in mind as we navigate through Earth conditions. The formal retrograde period will not begin until August 23, and then it will last. We'll have retrograde Mercury through September the 14th. Then on September 15, Mercury turns direct, and we have again the mild or shadow period from September 15 through 30. Now, if you're wondering about all those dates and if you're going to keep them straight, you can find them all on the Astrology of World Events on Substack. There's an article posted there that has all these dates for you, and you can get them there as well as hear them right here in this program. So the total effect for retrograde Mercury is just almost all of August and all of September, with the strongest effect occurring from August 23 through September 14. The strongest influence, August 23 through September 14. But almost the entire month of August and certainly the entire month of September is affected to a certain extent. So we're there already. Now, in the week of August 7 through 13, we have also to bear in mind the fact that the moon is in its waning cycle now. That's right, we're post full moon. Full moon was last week. So already we are in the waning phase of the lunar cycle. And what does that mean? Well, according to 20th century transpersonal astrologer Dane Rudhyar, we're in the phase that has to do with understanding what the previous part of the cycle was about, which started on July 17. That was the new moon date. And then we had the full moon 2 weeks later. And now we're at the point of understanding or contemplating the meaning of it. Rudhyar called this point in time the crisis of understanding. And that is a psychological moment in which we grapple with what we have experienced and learned since the new moon on July 17. Now, there's a particular moment when that realization might gel or really become crystal clear, and that's when the moon makes its fourth quarter on Tuesday, August 8 at 5:28 a.m. Central Time. It's not even 12 hours away from now if you're hearing this on live broadcast. At that point, the sun will be 16 degrees of Leo and the moon 16 degrees of Taurus. That will be an important passage. It's basically sleep time for a lot of people in the central part of the United States, so dreams might be the vehicle through which the understanding comes. Or it may be that upon awakening early that morning, there's a clarity. Look for that. Tuesday, August 8th, 5:28 a.m. Central Time, or adjust that for your own time zone. So that's another factor in our experience this week. Look at what you learn or understand or come to a clarity about, because that's significant within this experience of the lunar cycle. Also, with the waning portion of the lunar cycle, the emotional intensity that we felt at the full moon begins to wind down, decrease, deteriorate, fall apart, be less of an issue, and have less of a grip on us. We become a little bit less intent about everything and relax as energies kind of slowly devolve to the period right before the new moon. So we can expect that we're a little bit less physically active as well. And we may see a bit of slowing in our productive output. Those things are all consistent with the waning phase of the lunar cycle. So if you see that's happening in yourself, there's no need to be angry with yourself about it. Just rest and let the process work. Now, the big news for this week is the Venus-Uranus square, which takes place on Wednesday, August 9. And I call this the Venus-Uranus Fracas. Fracas, fracas. In other words, rumble, argument, flap. Yes, even a flap. That word was used for other things beyond multiple UFO sightings in years past, meaning social tempest in a teapot sort of thing. Yeah. So Venus square Uranus. And this is an important influence for us on a personal level in our individual experiences, because it really indicates that we're all going through some radical fluctuations and changes and disruptions in our social networks, in our friendship fabric that we try to live within. So what's going on there is that there's a electromagnetic disaffinity in some areas that we are experiencing, where we're not on the same page with people, or we're not approaching things the same way, or perhaps we've had some very serious ideological disagreements. And so some social realignments are indicated. Interestingly, this week's Venus-Uranus square is but one of 3 Venus-Uranus squares occurring between July 1 and September 29 this year. The first one was on July 1. The second one is on August 9th, coming up this week. And the last and final is on September 29. So I believe that this is a process, that what we're seeing here with the triple pattern, with the 3 squares of Venus, is a pattern. Of course, this can only happen because Venus has turned retrograde. Yes, Venus is retrograde right now, and that's why we're having this second square. Venus turned retrograde on July 22 at the 28th degree of Leo. And that is a significant fact, and it has affected everybody, no matter what your age is, what your profession, or what your daily activities are. We all experience these energies together, because these are the collective influences that affect us all on the planet. So when Venus went retrograde, it's like when Mercury does. It's an appearance. It doesn't actually, the planet doesn't actually turn around and backtrack in its orbit. It's all an appearance because of the concentric arrangement of the solar system and the angle of view of planet Earth on that second body. So in this case, it's Venus. So Venus is retrograde. My goodness. And you can see what the picture is now for the late summer of 2023. We have 2 inner planets that are going to be in retrograde motion. That's Mercury starting on August 23, and Venus is already retrograde, having gone retrograde back in July. The question is, what does it mean? Well, it means a shift in perspective. in the matters of Mercury and in the matters of Venus. The matters of Mercury are mind, thought, speech, communication, plans, agendas, travel. And the matters of Venus are connectedness, friendship, romance, love, celebration of life, and pleasantry. These are all important parts of life. And with those two planets retrograde, we know there is an effect in both of those areas. So the process with the Venus portion of it is going to be very clear and very precise and very emphasized this week on August 9. I think you'll be able to feel these changing energies in the Venus spheres of life, or Venus sphere of life, on both the 8th and the 9th and the 10th. So there's a 3-day period in there, I should say, a 3-day period, 8, 9, 10 August, when we're all going to really feel this Venus-Uranus square. At that time, Venus will be located at 23 degrees of Leo and Uranus at 23 degrees of Taurus. Both of those signs are fixed signs. The fixed signs connect with persistence and determination, but also stubbornness and the refusal to change. So there's quite a drama going on between the different aspects of ourselves. Yeah. One of our viewers right now says, "Sure is a crazy time right now." I'll agree to that. Yeah, the Venus-Uranus square is doing a lot of things, and not only is it disrupting certain aspects of our existing social connections, I think it's also accelerating public awareness of extraterrestrials, the extraterrestrial possibility or hypothesis, UFOs, UAPs, and advanced travel technologies. Yes, it's accelerating. That's what Uranus does. It always speeds things up. It's accelerating the public awareness of that, creating a discourse and a discussion and a public dialogue on that that's drawing some people together. That's Venus. And pushing some people away. That's Uranus. That's the disruptive effect of Uranus. So yeah, this is the big energy for this week. Uranus and Venus locked in this square, in this tense relationship that didn't start just today or yesterday. It started way back at the beginning of July. Whatever your process was, you might want to think about that. What happened in early July that was connected with your sense of identity within your social world, within your primary relationships? That thing comes up for review again, for intensity, for action in the middle of this week, and probably will be also noticeable to you the 8th and the 10th. So 8, 9, 10 August, there's big action there. Decisions about who to work with, who to team work with, where your fundamental affinities lie. That's the question. And it's a process that is not going to be over quickly, because it runs all the way down through September 29. And we're all working through this right now. Many people in this listenership will say, well, does that affect the disclosure movement? And I think the answer to that question is clearly, yes, it does. And it is bringing people together to work on that issue who are intensely committed to it and interested in it, and excited about the public realization that we are one with our universal surroundings and neighborhood. And we've known this for a very long time. And now consciousness is opening up for that more broadly on our planet. And that Venus-Uranus square, even though it's troublesome, is also helping that process by helping to shatter the resistance which has existed before. So there you have it. In the week of August 7 through 13, we have basically 3 things to keep in mind. The waning phase of the lunar cycle. So we're slowing down just a little bit, and people may be a little bit slower to answer on the email or the telephone and all of that. Events and activity levels are slowing just a bit. not to a dead halt, but slowing down just a little bit here because of because we're in the waning phase of the lunar cycle. So that's one thing. Second, we've got the Venus-Uranus square, which is disrupting a lot of previously stable situations. And finally, we have entered into the shadow period of the retrograde Mercury period, which is coming August 23 and thereafter. We've already entered the preparation for that. So these are the three big influences for this week. Waning phase of the lunar cycle, the Venus-Uranus square, and the shadow period, the shadow of retrograde Mercury. So yes, it is crazy times. We can thrive during this period of time, and we can learn and we can enjoy ourselves, but we really are individually and collectively going through some meaningful reevaluations right now. I'll be right back after a break with the Astrology of Ufology.
This is Margie Kay inviting you to check out the latest edition of Onyx News Magazine with thought-provoking articles about UFOs, extraterrestrials, cryptids, consciousness, and amazing photos of anomalous objects and more. And there's always a feature article by our managing editor, Lee Spiegel. Get a free digital issue with your free subscription to the Onyx Network, or get a printed copy with your X Club Gold subscription in the U.S. Visit onyxnetwork.com to see details. That's onyxnetwork.com.
Welcome, Star Friends. I'm Maureen Richmond, and you're listening to Starspeak on the Onyx Digital Broadcasting Network. I'm glad to have you here with me. We've got some interesting things to consider. You remember that this month, August of 2023, is affected by the retrograde Mercury influence, which starts formally on August 23. In honor of that, I have some historical UFO sightings to share with you that occurred under retrograde Mercury. So you can see the kind of things that do happen when Mercury is retrograde. So let's start out with the first one, which is one that I think most everybody will know about. Yeah, it was 1947. As soon as I say that date, you know what I'm talking about. July 4th and 5th in Roswell, New Mexico. There was at that time the discovery by a number of people of a field littered with debris, and the realization that it was probably an extraterrestrial craft that had crashed. And there are many different interpretations of this event. Some people dispute it. Some say the crash may have been before July 4th and 5th. But there's one thing for sure. There was a retrieval which occurred during that period of time. Mercury was retrograde at 27 degrees Cancer. On both of those days, July 4 and 5, 1947. So if you were listening to the first part of this program, you know that retrograde Mercury only happens 17% of the time. That's not much. And it signifies a departure from the norm. Well, I guess that was a pretty big departure from the norm in 75 miles northwest of Roswell, New Mexico, the day that all that happened, the 2 days that all that happened. Yeah. Departure from the norm, and things didn't go exactly as expected. And there was a surprise and a reevaluation and all sorts of mind-opening activities. It all occurred under a retrograde Mercury. Up in the year 1950, on May 11, again, there was a UFO sighting encounter which occurred under retrograde Mercury. This one was in rural Oregon. This is also a very famous case in which a farming couple outdoors managing their farm tasks caught sight of a disc-shaped vehicle hovering in the sky and got photographs of it. Of course, this case has been disputed by many as well, but you can make of it what you want. I personally think it was a sighting, and guess what? It occurred under retrograde Mercury. Mercury was located zodiacally at 25 degrees of Taurus during that sighting and encounter. Now let's zip up to the year 1954. October 27, 1954. In Italy, 10,000 soccer fans were treated to an extraordinary sight in the sky. Yeah, it was a whole group of UFOs, disc-shaped UFOs that flew in and hovered over the stadium for a period of a few minutes. And people were so aghast that it even stopped the soccer game for a period of time while everyone gaped and looked in the sky. Mercury was retrograde, this time 8 degrees Scorpio. You can see the departure from the norm, things that are a little different, things that blow your mind, things you wouldn't have expected happen under retrograde Mercury. In the year 1965, on December 9th, there was yet another extraordinary historical UFO encounter. This one is called the Kecksburg incident, after Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, where the object finally deposited itself. But the viewing of it started long before in Canada and across the northern United States as an object streaked eastward at high speed and then finally came to Earth in rural area of Kecksburg, Pennsylvania. There, some people were able to get a look at it, and they said that the craft was covered with some unusual form of writing that looked a great deal like Egyptian hieroglyphics. Mercury was retrograde at 4 degrees of Sagittarius, and it was precisely conjunct the transiting lunar south node, also at 4 degrees Sagittarius. Sagittarius is a sign associated with long distance travel. Retrograde Mercury, 4 degrees Sagittarius, certainly brought that theme into focus for thousands of people who saw this unusual event and who witnessed the shape of the craft, which was also quite unusual. I think it was acorn formed and not a disc shape. So everything about this event was not exactly what would be expected. And that's the thing with retrograde Mercury. It departs from the expected, from the norm, from the usual way of doing things. It's something different or from a unknown zone. In 1996, there was another fascinating and fantastic thing that happened. This one was in Varginha, Brazil. Anybody who's in the UFO movement knows this extraordinary story, which was memorialized in a film called Moment of Contact by James Fox, I believe. And yeah, in Varginha, Brazil, a craft crashed. Plenty of people saw it fall out of the sky. And the next day, in a small village that was nearby the crash site, individuals saw beings who were not humans. They were very different. Some of the witnesses said that these creatures had 3 horn-like protrusions on the tops of their heads, red eyes, and oily skin. One of these creatures was even directly contacted by an individual who attempted to get help for it. It was injured. So this is an extraordinary contact situation. And there was a death that followed this. The individual who actually physically touched one of the beings passed away of an unknown bacterial infection. So you can see how far this can go with retrograde Mercury. On January 20, 1996, in the Varginha incident, Mercury stood at 25 degrees Capricorn, and Neptune also 25 degrees Capricorn. So there was a precise conjunction between retrograde Mercury and the planet Neptune. That means those two bodies were seen on the same side of the Earth in a line of sight relationship. That's what a conjunction is. We see it that way through our measuring system, which is the zodiac. Retrograde Mercury conjunct Neptune, it's a very unusual configuration. It doesn't happen all the time. It's quite rare. Mercury does make a conjunction to Neptune once a year, but it's not always retrograde. So you can see that the retrograde factor there really makes a difference in the degree of the extraordinary that manifests at that time. And finally, the O'Hare International Airport incident in Chicago, Illinois on November 7, 2006. That's a great story, and there are plenty of videos that you can watch about it. That day in November 2006, flight crew was able to stand still and watch for several minutes as a disc-shaped UFO hovered right inside the confines of the O'Hare Airport area, kind of close to where airplanes dock and let people off. It wasn't too far away from there, and it wasn't too high. For several minutes, the flight crew had a sustained opportunity to just observe. Mercury was retrograde at 18 degrees of Scorpio. Now, there's another interesting thing about retrograde Mercury. People are born with retrograde Mercury in their personal astrologies, and there's somebody in the field of ufology, a leading figure who's very interesting and enigmatic and controversial, who has retrograde Mercury in his personal astrology. And that's Robert Bigelow, the aerospace entrepreneur and philanthropist of the paranormal. Right, Robert Bigelow. Now, he's a sun sign Taurus. And so he comes by his billionaire status naturally as far as astrology goes, because Taurus is the money sign in the zodiac. Bigelow, yes, is a Taurus. And his Mercury is also in Taurus at 7 degrees of Taurus, precisely square Pluto at 7 degrees of Leo in his own personal chart. And that Mercury is retrograde. So yeah, he's a little bit of a departure from the norm of humanity, isn't it? Because he's forward thinking. He's created a tremendous amount of financial resource and abundance, and has devoted so much of that to aerospace exploration and development, but also to paranormal research. Most recently, he's founded a nonprofit by the name of the Bigelow Institute for the Study of Consciousness, I believe it is, BICS, yeah. And just this year, they started offering, Bix started offering $1 million worth of award money for compelling projects proving or demonstrating the reality of continued life after physical death. Retrograde Mercury, yeah, he takes a little bit of a different approach to topics, ideas, human life, and he certainly made a big impact on the paranormal and ufology field as a result of that creative thinking that is outside of the box and leads the way in a different perspective. Robert Bigelow's 22-degree Taurus sun is currently being activated by transiting Uranus, which was precisely conjunct his sun degree in June and July of this year, and will be again in September and October of this year. So this is the period of time that the Bigelow Institute for the Study of Consciousness is processing the proposals and the write-ups for the projects that they put out, requests that people submit earlier this year. And something interesting is sure to come of all of this. Whatever it is, it's going to, again, project Robert Bigelow into the spotlight as Uranus passes over this degree of the zodiac associated with his own sun's position. So something is really going to be coming forth from Robert Bigelow. We can be sure about that, as transiting Uranus, the planet that is associated with advanced technology and breakthroughs into higher space, activates his chart this year. I'll be right back with more in just a moment, and we'll continue our discussion with the astrology of ufology after the break. Welcome back, star friends. Ufological luminary Robert Bigelow has Mercury at 7 degrees of Taurus, precisely square Pluto at 7 degrees of Leo. So not only does he have a strong Mercury influence and a strong retrograde Mercury influence, he's got a strong Pluto influence. Yeah, he sure does. Pluto, of all the archetypes in astrology, really concerns itself with the continuity of psychic life after death, the continuity of psychic life after death, the survival of the soul, reincarnation. Why is that? Well, it's because the origin of the astrological Pluto archetype is in the Greek god Hades, whose domain was the underworld to which souls went after they had died to process their material and get ready for reincarnation. That's the Hades Pluto archetype. And it's very emphasized in the astrology of Robert Bigelow. And he's not the only one in the ufological field for whom that is true. It's also true for MUFON University Dean Mindy Toutfest, who has the sun opposite Pluto in her natal chart, as I discussed in last week's episode. Yeah, so Pluto's very strong in her chart, and she is the author of a book titled Dying to Meet Them, which cogently draws the parallel and relationship between near-death experiences and UFO contactee experiences. Travis Walton, a famous UFO experiencer, also has Pluto emphasized in his natal astrology, with his own sun at 22 degrees Aquarius, opposite Pluto at 22 Leo. And interestingly, Representative Tim Burchett, who was instrumental in bringing the UAP hearing to the House of Representatives and a subcommittee of the House Oversight Committee, also has Pluto emphasized in his chart. And he's said that he's totally convinced that UAP exists, that he has friends who've had sightings, and I believe he's even said he's had one himself. He certainly is interested in the field. Burchett has retrograde Mercury conjunct Pluto in Virgo. So there you can see the several themes working together in the field of ufology to bring out the kind of depth of connection and the ability to project oneself into some reality beyond the physical, daily, routine existence that we all experience. Now, there's another issue that I know everyone is thinking about and wondering about. I've heard a lot of people voice this question, and it concerns our final segment, the long-term influences. So I'll be back in just a moment with a discussion on long-term influences. The question on everybody's mind that I've heard a lot of people talk about and say and express is, why is it just now, here in the spring and summer of the year 2023, that so much activity is occurring in the disclosure movement? What happened? Of course, there are answers that we could give to that question from human experience and a sequence of events that have occurred in journalism and in the political process to get us to where we are. And those are good answers. Astrologically, we'd have a different answer, because events in the outer world are understood as inspired or even powered by astrological influences within the astrological world. So it becomes a question of what astrological influence could be causing this. And it's very evident what it is. You know, the recent flurry of disclosure activity began in early June. Now, the groundwork for it had been laid months and years before. But the flurry of activity and the sudden willingness of congressional members to study this question with seriousness and careful thought, and the burgeoning media coverage started just recently, started perhaps in June. Well, what was happening astrologically? Well, the planet Pluto had just entered Aquarius to stay for a few months earlier in the spring, doing so in late March. And it was in Aquarius. Pluto was in Aquarius through mid-June. Now, it takes Pluto 248 years to get all the way around the zodiac. So it only comes into Aquarius every 248 years. In other words, it's a rare occurrence. And it's going to bring out the whole dynamic of what the sign Aquarius is all about. Aquarius is a progressive, forward-looking, futuristic energy or archetype that concerns itself with the relationship of the units within the universe. Huge sense of neighborhood and family, much larger than that of the biological connections that we have on planet Earth, or even the social connections. It's cosmic. Aquarius bespeaks of the cosmic connection or the family of the entire galaxy or of the created universe and its billions of galaxies. Aquarius is associated with futuristic and modern advances in technology as well. So you can see that when Pluto came into that sign, it intensified that archetype and awakened that archetype and that realization within human experience. Not only that, But in the month of May, which immediately preceded this flurry of activity around disclosure, in the month of May, Pluto in Aquarius was intensively accented by a configuration which very rarely happens. Mars entered Leo and directly opposed Pluto, while Jupiter in Taurus was precisely square or 90 degrees away from each of those two, creating a T-square configuration. Transiting T-square configurations are quite rare, and this one lasted for about a month once it got into position and was aimed precisely at Pluto in Aquarius. So you could say that for the entirety of the month of May, the themes related to Pluto in Aquarius were intensely brought to mind or brought into reality or awakened or brought into play. Tremendous amount of astrological emphasis on Pluto in Aquarius arose throughout the month of May and stayed in place. And then right after that, we have the article in Politico from Christopher Mellon advocating for worldwide disclosure, and then the Watershed article, which came on June 5 on the debrief from Leslie Kane and Ralph Blumenthal, detailing the revelations that Dave Grush, whistleblower, would carry to Congress, and eventually the congressional hearing on that later in July, on July 26. So all those events popped right out after an entire month of emphasis on Pluto's position in Aquarius. Guess what? We've got much more Pluto in Aquarius coming. Not right now. Pluto's retrograded back to Capricorn, and it's going to stay that way through the end of this year. But in early 2024, Pluto will enter Aquarius and stay there for 9 months before it again retrogrades into Capricorn. And then in the early part of 2025, actually late 2024, November 2024, Pluto will enter Aquarius to stay for 18 years. And that's when we're really going to get the sustained revelation of our connectedness with our universal environment, with our universal community of intelligences and other types of existence. Aquarius, as a sign and as an archetype, is a natural for the notion of diversity or different types of existence, which surely are in the created universe. So when Pluto spends an 18-year period in Aquarius, we can certainly expect that we are going to meet different types of existences that come to us through our contact with the greater environment where we live. Different civilizations, different forms of beings or beingness we might and will eventually encounter as Pluto's passage through Aquarius finalizes and stabilizes, and we have it for 18 years. So we have a couple of previews of that. That's late March through mid-June of 2023, and then late January of 2024 through late July of 2024, when Pluto will be in Aquarius and give us a taste of the future. This is Maureen Richmond signing off for Starspeak and the UNX Digital Broadcasting Network. Thank you so much for joining.